Okay, this is going to be a dual part video. Well, not really. It's kind of. It's talking about the two raptures that are described in the Bible. It's two gathering togethers. It says here in chapter 5, I wanted to reiterate from my other video on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians about how it says, "You're all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness." And right here it says, "For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night." So the day of the Lord is the thief. So what would the night be? The night would be the tribulation. But it says we are of the day, not of the night. And right before that, it talked about the rapture in chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians. And it says, "And with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first." And in 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about at the last trump. But then it can be maybe a little confusing. But not really, though, because Paul is talking to the Gentiles. So we know that's the last trump for the Gentiles. When he says, let me read it in 1 Corinthians 15. It talks about the rapture. It says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall put on incorruption, and this mortal shall put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." So, thank you. Thank you for that reminder, God. God through Paul. This is why I'm doing it. Yeah, it's not in vain. It says, yes, we are not of the night, nor of darkness. I went in Amos, in that other video, went into the book of Amos talking about, woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you? For it is a day of darkness, not of light. So, the day of the Lord is described in the book of Revelation, essentially. And it's all sorts of horrible things that happen. So, then the question is, I had a question that I was sort of asking, and it's, and let's go to the verse in Mark, for instance. I was thinking, so where is the gathering together of the Jews described in Revelation? Because if Jesus predicts it, then there's got to be something in Revelation. And in Daniel chapter 12, there's a clear verse talking about the same thing. It says, "And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, and from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven." Let me read the verse before, or a few verses before it. It says, "But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. And the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven." So, but the tribulation is described as a time of Jacob's trouble in the book of Jeremiah, and it is. When we go to the book of Revelation, we start to see a lot of why it's called the time of Jacob's trouble, because they need to keep the commandments of God, which is not grievous, and have the faith of Christ. None of those are grievous, but the difficult part will be all these things that are happening. So I'm thinking, but I sort of have a speculation here. I'm thinking that the 144,000 are the ones that are gathered together after the tribulation, but I could be wrong about that. But it does seem like that. It says and they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And so it's interesting because it's talking about the context too. When we go into number 12, chapter 12, it talks about how the stars were cast from heaven right before this. And then it's saying, so perhaps they go through, I believe, well, look, it says they go through a year and a half of the tribulation. There's a verse here that says, for a time, times, a time, and time and a half it talks about. So that's 3.5 years. Look at this. It says, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So this sign that's talked about right before this too, it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, in pain to be delivered. And it talks about the dragon here. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, etc. It talks about the war in heaven, and the great dragon was cast out. That old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out, and his angels were cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And so it's interesting how that all lines up. There's a lot to intake here, but it's definitely there. You know, I got to stay focused myself. You know, I'm working on it myself still. But I guess these are things that we'll learn the total details of. But it talks about you just have to reject the mark of the beast, no matter what. It talks about the blood of the saints. And right here, look, it says, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him 42 months. So that's about 3.5 years. So I think I lost the page. Where was I looking? Yeah, right here, verse 7. It says, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. It says, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So it's pretty simple. That verse kind of simplifies it right there. it's anybody who's left behind will have to do the things that are required to die for the Lord by rejecting the mark of the beast. It says, because that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. That's if they're left behind, if they never believe the gospel, like many of the Jews will. That's why in Jeremiah 30, verse 7, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. It talks about how there's all sorts of stuff that happens, and I guess they're going to have to somehow survive it. It's interesting. Maybe the plagues won't fall upon the saints, perhaps, because the ones who perhaps escaped the Antichrist and didn't be captured and killed. But it kind of would make sense that the 144,000 would be the ones that were redeemed from the earth, the ones that were the elect described by Jesus. And it's interesting, the context of it. It's talking about this right after Revelation 12, right after Jesus talks about when the stars of heaven fall. So I think that is a pretty interesting connection, quite honestly. And see, let's go back. It says, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And it's already talking about that in Revelation 14. It's talking about the sickle right at the end. Right here. It says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Sinai, and with 144,000 having his father's names written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. They sung, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts, and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, nor for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So it makes sense if, they were the ones, perhaps, that were keeping the commandments before the angel came, because then right after it talks about, so these would basically be the most faithful ones, and they were following the commandments. It says, and I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue, saying, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. It's talking about right here. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. They have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So that'll be the challenge, is avoiding that. You'll have to essentially either avoid capture, or if you're captured, you'll have to be beheaded. And so it says, here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. It talks about how they loved not their lives to the death. I think that's in chapter 13. Or no, that's in a different chapter. But it does say that they love not their lives to the death. And it's talking about some other other saints. So there's different saints, I believe. And I believe, this is interesting. I think if we go to Daniel, chapter 12, you're going to get some extra insight. Where's Daniel? It's a little further in. Oh, there it is. So, perhaps the first resurrection would be the day of the rapture of the elect. It says right here. It says some interesting stuff talking about the Antichrist. It says, "He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. The Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. He shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas of the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." So that's talking about the Antichrist is going to be cast into the lake of fire. It says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered." So it's interesting, that same time the people will be delivered. Right when it's talking about the beginning of that. So that could be the redeeming of the 144,000 who were without guile, basically perfect before God. It would make sense on many levels, because it says, "He is a Jew which is one inwardly," Many of the Jews didn't keep the commandments. It says, "And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth